right, guys, welcome to the asset class. He's Jesse.
My man Earl.
We are going to be providing some information to you that's going to be for educational purposes. We always implore you to do your own research, work with licensed professionals with great track records, and then also do your own research because each one, reach one, teach one. That's how we learn and grow as a community.
Man, so it is Black History Month.
That's right. The shortest month, but it might be the most powerful month. I might be biased.
It's interesting to see all of because you see the political theater that happens at the national level. And
Hmm.
on this here program, we are constantly talking about addressing issues at the local level and what that looks like. In being involved in the community, get to hear all of the things that are actually happening. So it's interesting where we're in Black History Month and coming into it, the City Council of Colorado Springs had a vote for recognizing August as Black Business Month, and it did not pass the City Council. And there was a City Council meeting a few weeks ago in which someone from the community came and gave a testimonial to the City Council, and they were speaking about ICE and its impact on the community because they've been operating here as well.
Hmm.
And that led to one of the members of the city council giving a.
Are we talking about how that man ran out of the room on Martin Luther King Jr. Day? He's like, we're all here for love, but I rebuke that, and Martin Luther King would have been for ICE. Really? Yeah, I felt like Riley Freeman. I was like, really, nigga? Like, come on, dog. That has to be one of the most blasphemous, crazy statements I've heard in all my days. I don't drop a lot of M bombs, but that
Yeah,
was one.
yeah,
That
yeah,
was one. My mom dropped it. She said, "This man is out of his ever loving mind."
yeah. And did you know that Councilwoman Gold was reprimanded for her response to it?
Mm, that's deep.
Officially reprimanded.
What do we say on this pod all the time? When a good person meets a bad system, the system wins. Like, we're witnessing that. I think she's an incredible young professional. She's being reprimanded for doing the right thing, and people besides us are not making enough noise about it.
What all of this demonstrates to me is that there's a lot of work to be done. Now, Mayor Yemi is running for reelection. I saw an invite. He's actually having a meet and greet this evening, right? Like I found out about it today. Although the city council voted against the Black Business Month officially being proclaimed, Mayor Yemi is delivering a proclamation declaring Black Business Month. And that's supposed to be happening on Monday. Well, I'm actually going to be delivering a 3-minute speech on the behalf of the Black Chamber of Commerce. It's an interesting opportunity because there's a responsibility that comes along with those kind of speeches on the heels of all that's going on, because it would be irresponsible to not acknowledge the insanity that's surrounding all of this, but to do it in a way that does not detract from the ultimate objective, which is to service Black businesses and professionals in Colorado Springs. So when you think about that in the context of everything that's going on here in the Springs, how would you approach that 3-minute speech?
My easy answer is to have my partner in business do that speech, and let that man carry that weight, as you are, and you're going to carry it gracefully. You're going to do incredible. I know you are. It's always been a tall task to ask a man to be reasonable in circumstances and situations of pure irrationality. Like some of the things that we're going to get into later on this episode are where you're going against what's considered the natural laws, where most people want to create a family, they want to chase some sort of dream or goal, or maybe they have a good job and their dream or goal lies outside of the job. And I feel like it's always been the impossible task for the black man, for the brown man, for the yellow man, for the red man to be in this world where people are smiling in your face while doing the most heinous things possible. And if you react with just pure gusto and rage, you are proving their point to the other uneducated and unconnected people. So I think I would have to approach it in an intellectual manner, and then I would have to, drop a couple hot bars in there. So they're like riding with me, they're riding with me, logical, logical. Woo! Yeah, you didn't see that left hook coming. Logical. Thank you. Praise the Most High, and I'm out.
To your point, the speech will be handled in the way that it needs to be handled, but it's interesting though because again, when we talk about the most consequential office in our political system, that being that of the citizen, I talk about that all the time. These are the times to be in the arena, and you can't really talk business without talking politics, without talking community engagement, rather that be through the social services that are available to the community, the nonprofits and the charities that service the community, the businesses that provide the taxes and other investment into the community at large, employing the community. It's an entire ecosystem, and politics plays its role in it. So as entrepreneurs, we have a responsibility to be engaged in that process, especially when it comes to the bureaucracy that impacts the community the most and that impacts the industry in which you operate the most. So, for example, here in Colorado, some of the laws that govern rental properties and like the responsibility of landlords or homeowners to tenants, some of the stuff is like, it's nuts. And my advisement to my client that's dealing with that is so you can allow yourself to continue to be drowned in busy work, all of this random stuff that you're doing throughout the day, or you can prioritize making your way into the rooms in which conversations are being had about laws that govern your industry so that you can have influence on those outcomes as opposed to just merely being a victim of the outcome. It's going to impact you one way or the other. So how you want to go about it. And that is just an example, but we have that responsibility as business owners to be involved in active, paying attention to what's going on to make sure that all of the right pieces are in place, and to know that the city council is essentially like playing in face, man. Like, that's not cool. So then it's
And
like,
I appreciate our friendship because I think I've seen so many crazy things, so many wild things that you start to become a little numb to it, where you're just like, oh, yeah, that's how the world is. And people are like, no, you're allowed to be angry. And I'm like, oh, I am allowed to be upset, especially being a large black male. It, it's always been in my mind that my reactions are going to be amplified because people are already fearful. So I don't ever want to be docile. We always say to each other, folks, we always say, stay dangerous because a dangerous man is a good man. It means that you are capable of chaos and destruction, but you are also capable of creation. And you are also, with that same energy, you're going to protect your family and your community and the Constitution.
At the end of the day, it centers back to what's right is right and what's wrong is wrong. And the point that you make there is a very important one. There are huge pockets in this country in which the spirit of Black folks have been beaten into submission, beaten into compliance. And that looks different in 2026 than it did, 100 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
years ago. But it's still remixed versions of the same thing. So to your point, I would argue to say that it's necessary for there to be enough rage to motivate action, constructive action, planned out, intentional action that achieves a positive outcome better than what the current state is.
Yeah. When we channel the force of a raging river in one direction and we make it linear, we can use that power to light up a whole city. So we have to use it that way. We got to transmute that energy where, okay, it may start off as rage and disrespect. And having that knee-jerk reaction is good because it means you respect yourself and you love yourself. That is a normal human psychological reaction if you are a healthy person. Now, the thing that we have to do that's challenging is to move past that initial emotional state and say, I'm going to turn this into something positive. Okay, I'm pissed off and I'm going to take it out on them by going hard in my craft, by making sure that I'm 5 times better than everybody else that pretend they do what I do, by being a great organizer, by raising capital, by there are so many different ways that we can use that energy to help heal others and in turn heal ourselves.
Man, my professional career has conditioned me in a way where when I'm presented with various situations, because I've been,
Mm-hmm.
man, like talking
I
about
know,
folks
man.
playing in your face, like I didn't experience all kinds of, and I learned early there's no win in an emotional response. My calculation as I'm facing different things, like I pause for a brief second, I process, and I fire back. But the fire back is in a way in which the best way to describe it is when I was in the Air Force, I was I was a senior airman. Yeah, so a senior airman is the pay grade of E4 with the
Mm-hmm.
highest enlisted grade being E9. So E4, like you're not a supervisor with direct reports or anything like that. Like you're still
Mm-hmm.
young in your career and young in responsibility.
Yeah.
So, well, as a senior airman, I was talking with a senior master sergeant, which is an E8. So again, E8, E9 is the highest. So
Mm-hmm.
they up there and I'm down. And at the end of the conversation, his response to me was, Airman Bullock, that was the most professional ass chewing I've ever received in my life. And that is the encapsulation of how I process things that are presented to me. and I'm firing back at you. But I recognize how I fire back at you is what makes the difference. Because when I wore the uniform, if I just fire it back any old kind of way, then that gets handled a whole different kind of way wearing the uniform.
Mm-hmm.
That get handled a whole different kind of way. So
Mm-hmm.
the stakes were a lot more immediate. So it's like, nah, when folks are doing the things they doing, I'm on your head top. We ain't playing them games. So as I think about all of the stuff that's happening just here and understanding what's going on broadly across the United States and the world at large, these all become so what do you stand on? What are you finna do?
I
You know,
think that's scary for a lot of folks because they haven't taken self-inventory. So they don't know what they actually believe. They just know who they side with. And that's dangerous. Yeah, that's like that Chris Rock joke. He's like, what do you call somebody that makes a decision and they know the answer to a question before the question is even asked? And, the crowd is dead silent. And he's like, you call them an idiot, but we call them Democrats and Republicans. He's like, I'll never be in that situation where before a question is even asked, my answer is chosen for me. Us contrarian thinkers don't move like that. We can't. We don't do it. We can't
no,
do it. Our brains don't work like that.
thinking about those roles when it comes to how business all kind of flows together as far as the entrepreneur, the politician, the nonprofit organization, the social services, how all of that intertwines into an ecosystem that serves as the foundation of community. Those roles, when it comes to business, the foundational roles when it comes to the financial side of it, because at the end of the day, men lie, women lie, numbers don't. I met with one of my clients earlier today, and we were talking about they have a goal, a profit goal for every project that they scope and deliver. And it can feel really good to sell a project, and then you look at the bank account and you like, man, I did that. Like,
Mm-hmm.
because I done did everything that need to happen, and the money is there, and it can feel real good. Now, as that money is sitting there in the account, you're not thinking about Uncle Sam yet. You're not thinking about the rent that got to go out in 3 weeks and the payroll. Like it looked good right there.
Mm-hmm.
Like I sold the thing, I delivered the thing, and damn, it didn't. It's there. So breaking down what good actually looks like comes through his numbers, because it feels good to sell the project and look at the bank account and that be there. But what is the actual margin on every project? Because if we looking at 10 projects that get closed out, and out of the 10, 6 of them, we sold it for this amount and we spent more than what we brought in to deliver it. But those 4 that we actually were profitable on, the profit margin was so good that it hid how bad that those other 6 were. And as we're perpetually moving through this cycle of every 10 projects being closed, 6 of them are being done shitty, and the other 4 are covering up for them, we lose a lot throughout the course of the year. The problem in everything that I just described there for many business owners is not understanding the separation between the financial roles in business. In other words, they think I have a bookkeeper, so the bookkeeper should be giving me that kind of insight because
That's not their job.
they're handling my numbers. Like they handling my numbers. Oh, and I hear this all the time. No, my CPA should be doing, like, I don't even like my CPA don't. And it's like, bro, you don't understand the functional roles on the financial side of business. So it's important to dispel the myths and the rumors and to clarify what each functional role is actually responsible for so that the business can put itself in the best position to scale and sustain itself through the scaling. So again, I mentioned bookkeeper. The bookkeeper is only responsible for categorizing transactions. So if the business received money in from a sale, then it is being categorized as income. If the owner is putting money into the business for whatever reason, then that is being categorized as an equity transaction on the balance sheet. And that transaction is not being categorized as income, because if it gets categorized as income, then now that contribution gets taxed. So the bookkeeper is responsible for that, like categorizing the transactions. And the bookkeeper is only going to be as good as their accounting background to understand what each transaction actually is. Anybody can categorize a transaction. Now, if it's accurately categorized, is a whole different conversation. So how well that they are versed in generally accepted accounting principles are going to make that determination on how effective that they are as a bookkeeper. But in that, there's a separation between a bookkeeper and an accountant, where that accountant is actually trained in generally accepted accounting principles, as I just alluded to. And then what separates an accountant from a CPA is the CPA is responsible for making sure that the tax compliance is that the reporting rather is in compliance with tax reporting requirements from the IRS. They are bona fide referees. They make sure that the reporting is in compliance.
Yeah, they're compliance officers. And many of them work more for the IRS than they do for clients, but that's a whole nother conversation.
And that's why I'm talking about it, right? Because again, a lot of business owners think that because they have a CPA, the CPA should be guiding their liability mitigation. And it's like, that's not what they do. That's not what they're responsible for doing. That's a whole different function, which I dished that to you, where we're talking about the certified tax and business advisor.
Yeah, that's where we're starting to talk about aligned wealth in the same way that an accountant and a CPA are worlds apart. You know, what I do as a CTBA alongside teams of special CPAs, enrolled agents, and tax attorneys is to align your wealth. So I want to look at your raw data, and I want to get the story because you're working with a great business coach like Jesse. So we're having accurate information on what's going on in the business. And what we do is tie a tax plan around your business goals and your personal goals. That is so important because so many people are going to try to turn a hobby into a business, and that's how you end up in an orange jumpsuit. IRS doesn't like that. The IRS wants a business to be a business. You have to be in the pursuit of profit. So what can we do? We can fold in the things you like to do in a tax compliant way so you can double dip, triple dip, sometimes quadruple dip. Because like I've said it once, I'll say it a million times. When your tax plan, your business growth plan, your personal wealth plan, and your estate plan are all on the same line, then your dollars get to work for your best interests instead of against each other.
In that, we've now gone through the bookkeeper, the accountant, the CPA, and the CTBA, which then brings us to the CFO piece. So everything that I broke down a little earlier there, where, you know, we're talking about the margins of the projects. The reason that that's important, the individual projects, is because the performance of the individual projects rolls up into the cost of goods sold, which impacts the gross margin. So when we are controlling the margin of every individual project, we maximize the ultimate outcome.
Mm-hmm.
So when the CFO is looking at a profit and loss statement, and they see that your cost of goods sold has increased from 22% to 27%, they may start asking questions about how you manage every project, because they understand that how you manage your project is going to make the difference on what that margin looks like.
Can you speak to how that 5% ends up being a death spiral? Because I know people hear that, they're like, it's 5%, it's 2%. It doesn't matter. I'm just going to sell more projects.
Yeah, it is man, I love how you describe that too. It is an absolute death spiral, because in that inefficiency is felt in real life. And the way that that's felt in real life is the business owner is spending all of this money on payroll, but they also doing a bunch of the work that they're paying people to do. So like, you paying somebody to perform a function, they don't do it very well. So now the business owner is doing their job as well. That's oftentimes attached with seeing the increases, because that means that there aren't consistent workflows and standards
But
that
coach,
ensure.
it doesn't cost them anything to work a little harder. Isn't that what Americans are supposed to do, is work harder? So what? You're the business owner. You're making the big bucks. Now you got to go back over a job. It keeps you humble. Is that right? Or
Everybody is entitled to their perception of reality. So I'm not here to say either way. What I will say, though, is through what I've been helping to correct since 2018 formally, is the idea of working harder. What that does over the long term is burns out the folks that, because, and you've said it a few times, Earl, you introduce a good person to a bad system, the bad system is going to win. So when you have that person operating in that bad system and you just tell them to work harder, count the days until the good ones start to either reflect the bad ones, or they just completely remove themselves from the mix altogether. Count your days. That's what that does. And when we talk about the quality of output, when people are just stressed out because they just got to make it through the day, they stop caring about certain things the way that they would if they had the time to like really process and own their responsibilities, as opposed to surviving the day. There's a cost, a deep and profound one. But tying that all back to the CFO function, again, that is completely separate from the aforementioned functions. The CFO is the one that is kind of challenging you to, what are we doing operationally? What are we doing from a sales perspective to improve what we're looking at here on these financial statements? The CFO is looking at that the actual value, the book value of the company, increasing it. How do we do that? What are we doing to really facilitate constant growth? You know, a CFO is looking at that. Then you've got tax attorneys, and the tax attorneys are who defend or prosecute the cases in court when it comes to all things taxes. And that's based on the law as it's written. When I first started consulting, I can't remember what they said, but I think that it's something to the effect of, if you like laid out the entire tax code, every page of the tax code, it would circle the entire world like 2 times or something like that. Like it's a lot of paperwork. It's a lot of fancy words. It's a lot of nonsense. So, and it's intended to be that way so that those who know capitalize and those who don't get 8. Like that's how the system is set up. So the tax attorneys are the ones that decode all of that and defend it or prosecute it. Like, and then you got the tax judges that are actually saying the law, quite literally. when it comes to all things tax. The reason that it is of the utmost importance for us as business owners to understand the distinction between those roles is when we are sitting back frustrated because we paying a whole bunch of money for a CPA that's not delivering, well, you got to check your expectations, brother.
You know, to that point that you made, talking about how big the tax code is, the IRC, that is the biggest way I help people understand the difference between what I do and what a accountant does or what a CPA does that has not been trained to be a proactive tax planner. Because there are some phenomenal CPAs out there. Just know they had to invest in themselves to get education far past what a CPA was required to have.
And
So
they
if you
bill accordingly.
Yeah, they sure do. You're getting billed by the hour. Most definitely. And you'll see these folks where, okay, so the IRC is over 70,000 pages. To become a CPA, they study 3,000 pages. Almost 2,000 of those 3,000 pages are compliance. So CPAs are phenomenal at keeping you and I out of prison. But you see how that didn't involve a bunch of aligned wealth planning? When you talk to most CPAs, you know, right when they come out of school or they're even 2-3 years into their firm, they don't really understand the difference between like a 401k and a Roth. They can give you the basic answer. Well, a Roth is tax now and 401k is tax deferred. Sure. But like, what does that mean for you and your business? It's like, okay, we're putting a bunch of money in a tax deferred bucket so you don't pay tax this year in 2025. The crazy thing is you might be in a 22% tax bracket, where in the future, when you're planning to retire, it's very likely that you end up in a 45% tax bracket in this example. Why would we skip a discount on paying taxes now, where we defer to pay at a higher rate later on a larger amount of money? And if we factor in inflation into that, you are paying a higher amount of tax on a larger amount of money, and that money buys less stuff. It doesn't make sense on 3 accords. The 4th accord it doesn't make sense on is estate planning. Those 401ks become tax bombs. Right now, we're working with a client. We're trying to figure out why their tax rate was so high. They're like, yeah, this is how much we paid in taxes this year. And it's like, you guys only made 150, which is, you know, with inflation now, 150 is like making 75 10 years ago. So you can definitely live on it, but it's not like making 150 in 1990, that's for sure. So we're looking at this, and then I figure out they were forced to draw down a 401k. So when your loved one passes away and they have a 401k, it goes to you. There's something that was called the 10-year stretch, where, I'm sorry, it was called the stretch IRA, and there was a period of time where you could get your father passes away, you get their 401k, and it just becomes yours. And it just gets to keep growing and growing and growing until you get to retirement age, and then you're forced to pull out a certain amount of money, or you face a 50% tax. That's called RMD, required minimum distribution. Well, a group of guys in Washington said, hey, you know, if we, instead of giving them an indefinite amount of time, we're seeing these people average about 22 years before they spend the money that they got from their parents. Let's make it a 10-year window, and it's going to increase revenue for the IRS a few $1 trillion. Boom. So they got rid of it. So now people have 10 years to be able to do something with that money, and then you immediately have to start paying taxes. Well, life happens, you forget, you have a mediocre financial planner, and then those RMDs hit, and you start paying 50% taxes on that money. And all that flows through to the taxes you pay on your W-2. So we're so lucky that he reached out to us because we're going to be able to offset that, and we're going to be able to save this guy hundreds of thousands of dollars in taxes. All of his retirement is going to be tax-free, and it's going to give him 400% money in retirement. That's why we align things.
And there are so many layers to alignment, because those CFO examples are a portion of the wealth building strategy. The tax liability mitigation is another part of it. And then there's also insurance. So what is insurance, and how does that factor into not only growth from a planning perspective, but also how it informs historically? You know, how
Insurance is powerful, man. Without insurance, our world would look very, very, very different. For a long time, there wasn't insurance. So for Islamic people, it's considered haram to have most types of insurance, because to put a price on the human life is haram. It's a sin. So they found different systems to kind of make pools of money to be able to help each other out. Same thing with Roman Catholic. That was also a sin, because it was said to create more mortal vice, where you're either murdering people for money, or you're worth more dead than alive. So you take your own life so your family can prosper. Insurance is the mitigation of risk. And every 4 years, some dumb group pops up and they tell you you don't need insurance. These people either have no assets or they don't care about their assets. This is the asset class. We stack assets on assets on assets. We teach you how to buy assets to not pay taxes, to buy more assets to make money. So we're not in that game. We're in the game of protecting ourselves from catastrophic loss. And that's what insurance does. It says, if your house burns down, what is way easier for you to have at this point in time, $450,000 cash to rebuild it? Or is it way easier to pay, $200, $300, $400, $500 a month, depending on where you live in the country? And a whole bunch of people will do that, and we'll make a big pool of the money. This is the law of large numbers. This is why so many people say, President Trump killed ACA. He stopped the flow of the law of large numbers of people coming into ACA, because the bigger the group is, the more standardized the risk becomes. So that's what insurance is. Now, historically, we can really look back to the 15th century to start looking at how insurance works today. So we had these people in Europe, you may have heard of them, running around, taking stuff, exploring trade routes, trying to get out of, a rainy place called England, or trying to get out of Spain and Portugal. And as they start going on longer and longer boat trips, the risk increases exponentially. So people don't want to do it anymore, because the chance of dying is high, the chance of piracy is high, the chances of getting kidnapped are even higher. So they start making maritime insurance policies. And this is where, if you have a seaworthy vessel, meaning your ship is, pretty safe, good to sail, and you have men who know what they're doing, risk can be insured. So if you go off to an island and somebody's holding you hostage, they got the thunder stick against your head. Hey, we have insurance. Send your person back to go get it and let us go. And very quickly, that became very heinous. I feel so grateful for us to have this platform, and for us to have the multiple businesses that we own, including this one, because, it's Black History Month, and the first goods that we really see traded on the stock market were bodies like yours and mine. The first gigantic amount of goods being moved across the transatlantic were bodies like yours and mine. And it gets so heinous. So like, I want to really get into this, and we're going to talk about it matter of factly, but we're not going to skip over how heinous and evil and the morality of it. Just so this is not a 9-hour episode, we're going to go through the different components of it. But I have to start off by saying slaves are not a type of people. People become enslaved. We're talking about doctors. We're talking about fathers, mothers, children, teachers, farmers, taken from their land and forced into a labor with no equity, no capital. That is what enslavement is. So sometimes I get caught up and I'm like, oh, hold on, don't die on this hill. When someone's like, the slaves, this, the slaves, that. They were not slaves, they were enslaved. Because insurance has always been about the numbers. Men lie, women lie, numbers don't. This is where actuarial science really starts, where it's saying, hey, how can we measure risk? And if we can get a big enough pool of people and we can charge the right premium, or premia, as they used to call it back in those days, we can make money. And these people will take more risk. And if they take more risk, we're going to collectively enjoy a better life. So I always laugh and think it's so funny, with Spain and England spending hundreds of millions of dollars looking for spices, and they still got bland food. It's crazy. It's crazy. But to start getting into this, so maritime law was interesting because a lot of times courts would decide if the insurance had to pay out or not based on the seaworthiness of the vessel. And very quickly, as the transatlantic slave trade started to happen, they're like, okay, this is risky, but they're worth a lot. So how do we insure them? Well, we can't insure them as life insurance because that's a sin to us, because we're Roman Catholic. So they went and they adopted something that German people are going to kill me, Klavenstedt, where it was an insurance against your liberty if you were kidnapped. But they flipped it on its head and said, you know what? We're not insuring the life of these dark-skinned people. We're ensuring their liberty, because their liberty is something that drives our commerce. That is insane to think about. They've separated the humanity and that person's pursuit of the life they want, and just liberty as being a factor, as a cog in a wheel. So when this starts to happen, things ramp up. And a lot of the biggest insurance companies in the world now really hit their up peak from slave insurance. Lloyds of London is the largest insurance company in the world. Guess what 1/3 of their profits were from?
You guessed it.
Yeah, the insurance of enslaved peoples. And it's interesting to see over time how it changed the way these policies, where everything was maritime at first, where our Black bodies were treated as cargo. So it was basically making sure the cargo made it where it was supposed to go. The other thing that I found very interesting is that they would not insure south of Louisiana because the West Indies were brutal. See, like in our colonies, enslaved people were put to work. Were they treated terribly? Of course. But in the West Indies, they were literally worked to death because the lifetime expected good, which is the black man and black woman, was seen as, maybe a 2-year thing, a 3-year thing. So they would literally work these people to death. So insurance companies would not insure them. Also, if you know anything about the West Indies, so especially like my Haitians, my Jamaicans, my Trinis, my Bermudan people, more insurrections there than anywhere. Because if they're gonna work you to death, man, you coming with me to the other side. So we have more insurrections in this part of the world than anywhere else. So no insurance company in the world would take that risk. If you go past Louisiana, hey, you know what you're doing, not being insured. And this is where we saw some really, really terrible, horrific things happen, like the Zong Massacre. So the Zong Massacre, that happened in 1781. That is where a ship hit a water shortage. And instead of trying to hit an island, instead of trying to desalinate some of the seawater, instead of rationing things out, they did the math and realized we're just going to throw every enslaved person off of the boat, and that gives us enough water, and they're all insured. 131 plus people thrown overboard in shackles because you could not risk them swimming and surviving and someone finding out, because that could be considered an act of insurrection, and insurrection's not covered on your policy. When I tell you the heinous levels where insurance was part of the platform that kept slavery going, it's crazy. So we see this happen. Court upholds, yep, it was a loss of cargo. And it sets a standard where if they're in a situation where an enslaved person becomes ill, you can kill them because they are at risk of infecting the crew and the others, making the vessel not seaworthy, and it's a covered loss, and they would pay out on it. So initially, these companies did not want to do this. They're like, you know what? It's too risky. And then people are like, come on, how much to insure a healthy white man? That's $20. $1? I'll give you $2 to insure one of my slaves. And they're like, okay. And they're like, wait. What if they're doing something risky? Okay, $3. $3 per $100 of coverage. And they could redeem this if an enslaved person lost their foot, their leg, if they're damaged. There could be payouts if someone was deputized in a posse and you escape as an enslaved person and they kill you dead, policy would pay out to the owner, loss of property. So the vast majority of time, enslaved people were not treated as people or humans, cargo. Now, eventually, when slavery was really booming here, so in 1830, it's terrible, right where you're from, my brother, in Virginia, that's where the largest insurance company, insurer slaves, popped up. Baltimore Life Insurance Company. They initially said no, then looked at how high they could charge premiums. It became 2/3 of their business overnight. We're talking about these companies are amassing hundreds of millions of dollars off the literal flesh of Black people, and very quickly, because there's moral hazard. So moral hazard in the insurance world mean if you get life insurance, what is your mindset about how you drive your car? Now, I'm sorry, if you get car insurance, what is your mindset about driving your car? Do you drive it all crazy because you're like, man, I got that full coverage, skirt. You know what I'm saying? We out here drifting, I'm covered. And that is part of the risk insurance companies take when they give you car insurance. So that's why if you're driving something sexy, it's expensive. You're driving something slow and ugly, you're Gucci. you're good. And I learned that when I was in property and casualty. So the moral hazard of insuring an enslaved person becomes with depreciation. So we always talk about depreciation with equipment and real estate. Land never depreciates, right? Well, remember, they treated these black bodies just like property. So they're looking at the lifetime expectancy of high value work coming from this enslaved person. So policies would only last for 7 years because they want to come back in and reevaluate and see how healthy the enslaved person is, not for the well-being of the enslaved person, but to see if they would renew another policy or not. Otherwise, they learned very quickly if the policies went longer than 7 years and these people were able to depreciate the cost that they purchased these black bodies, there's a terrible nexus point where this slave is worth so much more dead than alive. So the insurance companies want to make sure they cover their own butts. So it's terrible. It's maddening that the infrastructure of today's insurance markets very much so comes from the Atlantic slave trade. When we're talking about payouts and reparations, life insurance plays a huge part in that. So before we even get to the Civil War and the proclamation, different enslaved people were insured differently. So if you were a plantation enslaved person, most of them weren't insured. So if you're picking cotton, picking tobacco, no insurance, because is deemed a low risk activity. The thing that we learn in history and the thing that I learned when I first dived into this topic was the different types of vocations that enslaved men had, because the zeitgeist was always that we were dumb, we were slow, we were savages. However, when you look through these documents, these large bundles, large libraries, the ones that survived the Civil War, because most of them were burned down, and I don't feel bad about that at all. I wish we could have got more of the documents, but we have blacksmiths, we have ironworkers, we have people that are working on trains, we have steamboat workers, we have coal miners, we have carpenters. So I know in school, my idea of an enslaved person was just someone in a cotton field that couldn't read. When the reality was, sure, there were people working in those fields because cotton and tobacco were the gold and diamonds of that day. It was the most expensive raw material that could be turned into a finished product. So when people are like, oh, they were just picking cotton is what built America. It's how we got such substantial wealth because everyone around the world wanted it. They wanted the fabric. Man, these brothers was out there. They were working in warehouses, managing teams of other enslaved people for the production, and they had insurance policies put against them. And then if they try to escape, they try to leave, bam, they're dead. Owner gets paid out, his family gets nothing if his family wasn't broken up. So I really wanted to make sure that we talked about this stuff because insurance is so important to building wealth, and it's how wealth has been built. A lot of old money, it comes from these times, and some people were double indemnified because when the slaves were freed, so we're talking about 1865, or to be more accurate, we talk about Juneteenth, because there were several years Texas refused to let enslaved people go. So all the white slave owners said, hey, I took a massive loss. How are you going to pay me back? The United States government said, we're going to pay you up to $300 per property loss. And some of these people were double indemnified because the life insurance companies also paid out the death benefit. So we're talking about people getting $100,000, $200,000 in 1870. So we're talking about tens of millions of dollars. These people got all of this money, and then they got acres of land. And then in some places in the South, it's like you're a free slave, but it's illegal to not have a job. So they make vagrants laws, and then people go right back to working on this land that these folks got for free under the terms of prison. Based on everything that I talked about here, what do you think? What was most surprising to you? I know you're well versed on a lot of this stuff.
I think that all of that kind of speaks to two main things for me. One, insurance obviously plays an essential role in wealth building. And then secondarily, the dangers of dehumanization, because it takes a high degree of dehumanization in order for those types of things to be possible. If we as human beings are looking at other human beings as human beings, that type of stuff don't happen. There had to be subhuman processing of people looking at them as cargo, and the insurance trickery played in order to get payouts that resulted in death or dismemberment or brutal abuse.
It's terrible that on the ledger they call it depreciation, but in reality, we're talking about someone being lashed, someone being starved, sexual assault, attacked by dogs, whatever they wanted to do, buck breaking, all these different terrible, terrible, heinous things that were done. And that was considered depreciation of a good.
And
you couldn't have said it better.
And the only way that any of that could be possible was, again, through the dehumanization of an entire group of people. So as we fast forward to 2026 and we see the manifestation of dehumanization in modern times, when my daughter and I were reading Isabel Wilkerson's book Caste, one of the points that I foot stomped to her was how dehumanization was able to create the outcome in which you literally had families walking down German streets with the ashes of people raining down on them like a rainstorm. Like, not a rainstorm, no, like human ashes. How does that happen? Through a constant campaign of dehumanization. And when a group of people are allowed to be dehumanized, the atrocities that follow are historic in nature. So to be watching what's going on right now, the dehumanization, what that has manifested in. So back in 2016, when the rhetoric began about rapists and criminals and the worst of the worst and all of these things, that analogy of how you boil a frog, where you just gradually increase the temperature and the frog is never wise to the difference until they eventually are boiled alive. We've been conditioned gradually over time, a cycle of dehumanization of otherization, where we're looking at others. They shouldn't be here because if they weren't here, my life would be better. That same thing happened in Germany. That's what caused the Holocaust to be what it was. The dehumanization, the self-preservation and supremacy over others. So to watch that manifest into the largest law enforcement investment in modern history, we've seen all of the things that have been happening across the country as it relates to immigrants and American citizens, for that matter, that don't have the complexion for protection. To watch that manifest, the dehumanization manifest into, so first it was Renee Good, and Renee Good was like the first that got national, attention because American citizen. She's not the first person to die in connection to something initiated through all of these crackdowns that are going on, but she was the first. So again, dehumanization slowly over time got us to this space of her being murdered. Last week when we filmed, it was like, man, I don't even want to talk about the Alex Preddy thing because we just talked about Renee Good.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, but we can't not talk about it because it's too important. So this man is executed in the street after he's disarmed. And after it, that execution leads to a conversation about Second Amendment rights. Like the irony, the absolute irony that the Second Amendment becomes a conversation as a result of that. Now, as the folks that perpetuate the propaganda rebelled against that, like, nah, we're not even finna have a conversation about the Second Amendment, and y'all murdered that man in cold blood. The backlash on it was so intense that they ended up removing Greg Bavino, the dude that was walking down the street with like a little Nazi jacket, like finally put him on ice and told Kristi Noem to take a seat as well, and brought Tom Homan back to kind of take over the realm, as Pam Bondi is the Attorney General. Pam Bondi, the Attorney General of the United States. So as Tom Homan is coming in, Pam Bondi is sending a letter to the Minnesota state officials saying, we can start to draw down our 3,000 federal forces that outnumber your Minneapolis Police Department of just 650 people, right? A max of 650 police officers in the Minnesota Police Department. Pam Bondi's notification to the state of Minnesota is, we'll start to draw down our 3,000 folks if you give us access to your voter rolls, among other things. As I'm like looking at all of this stuff going on, the intent behind it, because again, the dehumanization started a long time ago, and it manifested through all of these different phases to us now being in a space where you got Pam Bondi doing that. You got, Brett, did you hear about what they did in Georgia? The FBI and Tulsi Gabbard. So Tulsi Gabbard is the Director of National Intelligence for the United States government. She was in Atlanta during a seizure of the 2020 voter rolls in Georgia. So Georgia, a Republican state, Republican governor, lieutenant governor, secretary of state, and legislature, both sides of the legislature, all Republican. All of those elected officials said that the election was like the most secure in his, like, there were small little improprieties that are expected in every election cycle, but no issues. This is what the elected officials in the state of Georgia have said. The FBI raided the election offices in Georgia and seized the voter rolls for all of the folks that voted in Fulton County in Georgia. And the president recently did an interview in which he said that Republicans should nationalize the elections. When I think about all of that, and also tying it back to how this episode began, these are not the times for us to be sitting back, being cool, calm, and collected while the house is on fire. These ain't the times, which is why I take every week that we get together to have these conversations so seriously, because these times are that critical. Like, we need to be having more of these conversations, because we watched how dehumanization got us to where we currently are. And we just been quiet and complacent the entire time, the boiling frog. At what point does enough become enough?
You know, I had an interesting thought while you were talking about the dehumanization. It took about 10 years. So if we go from 2016 to 2026, that's 10 years. That is about the same amount of time as the loss in World War I to World War II with the Third Reich rising up. That's insane. That is like the same amount of time. And one thing most people don't know is that Nazi officials came to the United States and they studied Jim Crow so they could take it back, because it was considered the most perfect system of racism. And guess what? South Africa heard the same thing. So they came over and they studied it. And that's where apartheid came from. So a lot of times people are like, oh my gosh, this person's a Nazi, this person's that. I'm like, no, they're a hateful American, because those people existed before the Nazis. The Nazis had to learn that from hateful Americans.
So check it out, man. As always, when it comes to the intent behind the conversations that we have on this here program, we are not here to inflame. We are not here to divide. We are not here to trigger trauma responses. That old adage of, when you stay ready, you ain't got to get ready, has never been more important than the times that we living in now. The world is changing. The foundation under our feet is shifting. How our lives and those of our families are going to look when all of this stuff shakes out are going to be dependent on how educated and engaged that we are in controlling as much of our future outcomes as we can. And we have a lot more influence than we give ourselves credit for. This is the time to wake up and get to it.
Like you said, if ever there was a time for you to reach out to your neighbor, to have real conversations and take real steps towards solving problems, it's right now.
Been my man Earl.
My man Jesse.
It's been the Asset Class. Thank you for listening.